The night she fell to her knees in the rain, clutching at my coat, I remembered the moment I gave my daughter-in-law $33 million, only for my own son to expel me from the home I had built with his father. Betrayal comes from those closest, and in that moment, under the gray curtain of a storm, the truth of that saying struck with icy precision. Her silk blouse clung to her body, her jeweled heels sinking into the mud, as if the ground itself had turned against her. She whispered words she had once sworn never to need. "Please, save him." Her mascara bled down her face, the sharp angles of her beauty ruined by fear. In her trembling hand, a phone lit up again and again with the same name, 2 letters that made her flinch each time they appeared. She pressed it to her chest as though to muffle the terror vibrating inside. That single detail, that set of initials glowing on the screen, hinted at a storm far greater than the rain drenching us both. 3 days earlier, I had left this house with nothing more than a small suitcase and the dull ache of betrayal twisting through my chest. I had not fought. I had not screamed. I had walked away carrying the heavy silence of a mother whose son had chosen another path, and that silence felt more crushing than any shouted word. The rain that night was colder, harder, as though nature itself mocked the loyalty I had given and the loyalty I had lost. Now she knelt before me, my daughter-in-law, who had once stood with her chin raised, victorious, clutching legal papers like weapons. That woman was gone. In her place was a shivering figure on the porch boards my husband had hammered with his own hands decades earlier. The wood darkened beneath her tears, as though the house itself wept for the disgrace it witnessed. The same home I was cast out of now served as the stage for her downfall. Her handbag, worth more than most people's monthly salary, lay discarded in the mud beside her. The glossy leather warped and soaked, a symbol of everything she valued more than family. It was almost poetic that the storm claimed it, erasing its shine, stripping it down to nothing. I had returned only for my gray wool coat, frayed at the elbows but rich in memory. Yet fate, the one who had driven me out, was now begging for my return. But beneath her desperation there was something else. Fear, sharper than grief, deeper than shame. Fear not of losing wealth, but of losing something irreplaceable. Her voice cracked on the words. "They will kill him." My son's name trembled in the air between us, a name that carried decades of love and disappointment in equal measure. The storm raged around us, thunder grumbling like some ancient judge. I could not ignore the irony. She had taken everything I valued. My home, my son's loyalty, even the dignity of age. And yet here she was, begging me to protect the very man who had turned his back on me. The victor had become the victim. The one who held all the cards had dropped them in the mud. The silence between us pulsed with unanswered questions. Who was coming for him? What deal had they struck that had twisted into such a deadly snare? I did not answer her. My silence weighed heavier than words, pressing down on her as surely as the rain pressed her to the ground. She sobbed, not the graceful tears of a woman accustomed to sympathy, but the guttural, choking cries of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. Her body shook so violently, I half believed the storm itself had entered her. And still, I did not move. I only held the envelope and listened to the hollow thud of water dripping from the porch roof onto the boards. She lifted her face to me then, pale and raw. And for the first time, I saw her not as family, not as foe, but as a broken creature caught in the machinery of something vast and merciless. In her eyes flickered the faint light of a truth I had not yet uncovered. Something darker than greed. Something that stretched beyond the greed of a woman and the weakness of a man. The initials glowing on her phone screen hinted at it, pulsing like a heartbeat of danger, promising a revelation yet to come. I turned away, the envelope heavy in my hand. The rain soaked my coat, plastering my hair to my face, but inside me, a clarity colder than the storm settled in. This was not forgiveness. This was not reconciliation. This was the beginning of something else. Something that would strip away lies, expose secrets, and test made a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. "This is a family asset restructuring," she said, smiling without warmth. The word family bent out of shape as it left her mouth. She talked in clean lines and cold numbers. Zoning potential, comparative sales, carrying costs. I heard none of it, only the grandfather clock counting down my old life. When she slid a single sheet forward, the heading snapped into focus. Waiver of life estate. My late husband had used plainer words. You live here as long as you breathe. Adam still didn't look up. His shoulders sagged. I realized he'd chosen his corner days ago and had decided silence was safer than love. "I'm not signing," I said, keeping my voice steady so my hands could shake in private. Sabrina's smile vanished like a stage light snuffed between scenes. "This is 23 figures for your family," she said, rounding the offer like a gleaming stone. $33 million. You'll have a lovely suite at a premier residence. Pool, classes, a garden. The brochure words smelled like new plastic. I watched my son's fingers twist the hem of his shirt, a nervous ritual he'd had since childhood. He twisted now, and every thread unspooled a little trust. A phone on the table buzzed and flipped, face up. A preview flashed. 2 initials and a short command. JC, status? Sabrina snatched it so fast the glass squeaked on wood. She pretended not to notice my stare. "We all win here," she said briskly. It wasn't persuasion. It was choreography. She stood, crossed the room, and opened the hall closet. The old weekend suitcase rolled out already packed with my clothes, folded military neat. A wool scarf of mine slipped free and landed at my feet like a small surrender flag. The suitcase wasn't a plan. It was a confession. They had prepared my exit before the conversation began. In the quiet, the house breathed. Old wood, lemons from this morning's polish, rose petals pressed in a book. Adam finally spoke, voice thin. "Mom, it's best for everyone. Not we think or I want. Best for everyone. A phrase people use when they've decided your needs don't count." The bottom margin. Lavender ink faint but visible. Something about the color nagged me. A whisper at the edge of memory. I set the paper down. "No," I said again, and this time the word had grain to it. Sabrina's jaw tightened. "Adam's future depends on this," she said, gesturing to my son as if he were an exhibit. When he finally raised his eyes, I saw not malice, but erosion, the kind that hollows a shoreline quietly until a cliff falls. The eviction wasn't loud. It was a choreography of soft clicks and measured steps. Sabrina zipped the suitcase. Adam lifted it with both hands, like he used to carry sleeping puppies when he was small. At the door, I turned toward the study where my husband kept his papers. Sabrina blocked the hallway with a gentle palm. "We've already cataloged the files," she said. "We'll courier anything you need." The word courier felt like a security guard in a tuxedo. I reached past her and took only my coat. Cedar and winter clung to it, a remembered season I could still choose. On the porch, the afternoon burned brighter than it should have. I paused at the top step to collect the missing piece of my balance. The wheels of the suitcase rattled down the boards. 3 bumps, a tiny echo for each decade I had lived here. At the car, Sabrina pressed an envelope into my hand. "For the motel," she said, voice gentle for the first time. Inside lay 2 crisp hundreds and a folded paper. The paper looked official, but the fold was sloppy, as if someone had needed it done fast. Speed leaves fingerprints if you know where to look. I drove to the Starlight Motor Inn, where the sign flickered like a nervous eye. In the room, bleach fought with old smoke and barely won. I sat on the bed and opened the envelope fully. The folded paper was a copy of the deed waiver. My signature flowed across the bottom in a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I traced the curve of my name with a fingertip that went cold. After the wrist fracture, my hand learned a new rhythm. This signature danced with the old one. Exact loops, even pressure, no tremor. Too perfect to be true, and therefore false. Midway down the page, the notary block returned to taunt me. The lavender stamp again. Precise, fast drying. Wrong. The whisper from earlier turned into a bell. I had worked 40 years as a legal secretary and handled for everyone. Love that asks you to erase yourself is not love. I wrote that on motel stationery because seeing the words anchored my breath. Then I wrote one more sentence. Find the flaw and follow it back to the source. The ink looked steadier than I felt, which helped. At dawn, I drove back by the lake, parking where the cedars disguised my car. From the path, I watched through the window as Sabrina moved through my kitchen, efficient as a metronome. She replaced the roses with sterile lilies. She opened the refrigerator, frowned at leftovers, and swept them into a trash bag, like old arguments. Adam wandered in, unshaven, eyes swollen from a sleep that hadn't restored him. He rubbed his temples while she talked, and even from a distance I could see the angle of her hand. Chopping, assigning, deciding. He nodded the way people do when they've run out of words. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Confirmation by Friday or funding freezes. No greeting, no signature. A second message arrived a minute later. Status, the same two initials hung below. Spare and surgical. J.C. I stared until the letters stopped meaning anything, and then meant too much. Their world had a clock I hadn't known about, and its ticking had become thunder in my ears. It was supposed to be just another Thursday afternoon, yet it became the day my son and his wife shattered the foundation of my life. The late sunlight drifted through the windows, catching dust motes in the air like tiny galaxies. I sat in my favorite armchair, the old floral upholstery faded but comforting, a half-finished crossword resting on my lap. The quiet tick of the grandfather clock filled the room, steady and reassuring. Then the door opened, and the rhythm of my life began to unravel. Nolan stepped in first, my only son. His shoulders hunched as though bearing an invisible weight, his eyes darting anywhere but toward mine. Behind him followed Sabrina, her cream-colored pantsuit sharp as a blade, her heels tapping a decisive rhythm across the hardwood floor. She shut the door with a soft click that seemed to seal us off from the rest of the world. I knew before she even spoke that something monumental and cruel was about to be laid before me. She didn't ease our home until my dying day. But here was Sabrina, sliding the document forward with a manicured finger, explaining that a buyer had offered $33 million for the property. Think of Nolan's future, she urged, her eyes gleaming as if the promise of wealth already belonged to her. My heart faltered, yet my answer was steady. No. Her mask cracked then, the professional veneer slipping into something sharper, colder. Her eyes narrowed, the charm drained from her face, leaving steel beneath. You don't understand what's at stake, she hissed, her voice now stripped of polish. But I did understand. This wasn't about security or family. This was about greed. I looked at Nolan again, silently begging him to intervene, to remind me he was still my son. But he kept staring at the floor, his silence more cutting than any insult. A vibration on the table drew my attention. Sabrina's phone buzzed with a single name, 2 letters glowing on the screen before she flipped it over. J.C. My heart stuttered, though I didn't yet know why. The initials felt like a shadow slipping into the room, unseen but powerful. That glimpse was enough to deepen my unease, a foreshadowing of forces larger than this cold negotiation. Sabrina seized the phone, her jaw tightening. Then she stood abruptly and moved to the closet. She pulled out a battered suitcase I had kept for small trips. She must have packed it earlier, while I had been out. The violation struck me harder than her words. My personal belongings, folded by hands that were not mine, dragged into the living room as if I were a tenant being evicted. She dropped it at my feet with a smirk. A scarf I had knitted years ago spilled out, carrying the faint scent of the ointment I used for my arthritis. My life was being reduced to luggage and a contract. Nolan's silence was the true betrayal. Sabrina's cruelty was expected. Her ambition had always burned bright. But my son's bowed head, his refusal to meet my eyes, was the knife that cut deepest. I whispered his name, hoping to awaken something in him. He remained still, a statue carved from shame. His silence screamed louder than words. He had chosen her over me. My body ached. Bleach and cigarette smoke. On the nightstand lay the envelope Sabrina had shoved into my hand as I left. Inside were 4 crisp $50 bills, and beneath them, a copy of the waiver with my forged signature. My name, replicated perfectly from years before my wrist surgery, stared back at me like a stranger wearing my face. For a moment, I doubted myself. Had grief after Robert's death clouded my mind enough that I had signed something carelessly? No. I had spent 40 years as a legal secretary. I read everything, even cereal boxes. The truth clawed its way into me. My son had kept an old document with my signature, handed it to his wife, and together they had stolen my life. Rage, cold and crystalline, replaced my grief. They thought I was broken. They forgot that I knew the law better than they knew themselves. I sat on the lumpy motel bed, the flickering green light painting the walls in rhythm with my fury, and I vowed this would not be the end of my story. This was not just betrayal. This was fraud, premeditated and cruel. They had underestimated me, and soon they would regret it. I would not fade quietly into the shadows of a cheap motel. I would fight. But first, I had to find the cracks in their perfect facade, and I already knew where to start, because the initials I had glimpsed on Sabrina's phone still pulsed in my mind. JC. Whoever that was, whatever power he carried, he was part of the machinery behind their scheme. And if I was going to dismantle the empire built on my ruin, I would have to uncover who he was, and why his name made her tremble. The morning after my exile, I carried the forged document to the one person I trusted with the truth, an old colleague turned attorney named Marissa Ortega. Her office overlooked the city, all glass and leather, a far cry from the small firm where we once shared files and coffee 30 years ago. When she saw my face, pale from sleepless hours, her smile faded. "What happened, Iris?" she asked softly. I didn't waste time. I laid the quitclaim deed on her desk, my name scrawled across it in a signature that wasn't mine. Marissa didn't touch it at first. She stared down as though the paper might bite. Then, sliding on her glasses, she leaned into the light and studied the ink. Her silence lasted a full minute, her eyes moving. Water-based. It smudges wrong. She clicked her pen like a gavel. They were in a rush. They thought you were powerless. But this is amateur work. A slow smile spread across her face. Not kind, but sharp. Predatory. She smelled victory. I told her everything. About Sabrina's corporate mask, Nolan's silence, the suitcase already packed. And I described the initials on Sabrina's phone. JC. Marissa froze for a heartbeat, then scribbled something on her notepad. "We'll get back to that," she murmured. Then she leaned back, her eyes hard. "You have a life estate. Robert made sure of it. That means, legally, you have more right to that home than Nolan does. Trying to break it is like punching through a brick wall. They couldn't win cleanly, so they cheated." The words life estate glowed in my mind like a shield. Robert had protected me even after death. He had known there might come a time when greed would rise against me, and he had built a fortress in the language of the law. My fury softened for just a moment into gratitude, bittersweet and aching. But then I thought of Nolan, my son, who must have given them my old signature to copy. The betrayal burned again, hotter than before. He hadn't just failed me, he had armed them against me. Marissa leaned forward, her voice dropping low, almost conspiratorial. The buyers, Aurelius Capital, are paranoid. They check every title, every signature, every claim. They will find this forgery. They will refuse to insure the property. And when that happens, Sabrina's entire deal will collapse. All we have to do is nothing. I stared at her, shocked. Nothing? After everything? But the sharp gleam in her eyes told me she was right. Sometimes silence is the deadliest weapon. Sometimes patience is a noose. A flicker of doubt crossed me. Could I wait? Could I let the people who betrayed me believe they had won, even for a few days longer? Marissa reached across the desk, her hand steady on mine. I know you want to act, but trust me, the trap is already set. They've handed you the rope, the knife, and the proof. I nodded, though inside me a restless fire still smoldered. I had never been good at waiting, but I knew. Notebook. I listed every detail I had. The forgery, the wrong ink, the life estate, the initials. Each clue was a nail in the coffin of their scheme. But the initials, they remained the open wound. I tapped the page again and again until the ink bled through. I didn't have the answer yet, but I would. And when I did, it would change everything. In the silence of that cheap room, I realized something vital. The betrayal of my son had not ended with my exile. It had only begun. The forgery was not just a theft of property. It was a declaration of war. And war demanded not just endurance, but strategy. I had both. I would not wait quietly. I would follow the threads, find the shadows, and turn their arrogance into their undoing. The question was not if I would win. The question was how much of themselves they would lose before I did. Outside, the rain began again, steady and cold. I opened the window and let the mist in, breathing it deep. The house was still mine. The land was still mine. And the law, patient and sharp, was on my side. Sabrina and Nolan thought they had written my ending. They had only written the prologue to theirs. The next morning, Marissa called me back to her office with urgency in her voice. When I arrived, she wasn't alone. A woman in her 40s with sleek hair and wire-rimmed glasses stood by the window, a tablet glowing in her hand. "This is Selma Green," Marissa introduced. "Financial analyst. She specializes in corporate structures and, more importantly, disentangling the webs people like Sabrina weave." Selma gave me a firm nod, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She gestured for me to sit, and as soon as I did, she pulled up a set of documents that made my stomach knot. "Your house," Selma began, "is not being sold directly. It's been moved into what's called a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. Basically, a shell company. They parked the property inside this entity and then used the entity to secure a loan. That $33 million? It's not cash on the table. It's a bridge loan, contingent on the property being clean." Her finger tapped the screen, highlighting rows of conditions and clauses. Clean title, clean insurance, clean history. Which means the forged deed is their ticking time bomb. I stated, "You don't need to rush. They've built their castle on sand." Once Aurelius realizes, the funding freezes, the deal dies, and Sabrina and Nolan are left exposed. "But there's more," she added grimly, glancing at Selma. Selma's eyes flicked to me, sympathy flickering there. "The coordinator overseeing the risk analysis for Aurelius Capital?" she asked. "It's someone named Julian Croft. Goes by JC. The initials struck like a bolt of lightning. I had seen them flash on Sabrina's phone, trembling in her hand like a weapon she couldn't control. JC wasn't just anyone. He was the man holding the strings, the one who could snap their entire scheme with a word. Selma tapped the screen again, showing me a chain of emails leaked through a public database. Julian Croft's tone was clinical, ruthless. "Insured title risk is eliminated," he had written. "If occupancy rights remain, funding halts. Resolve by end of week." Each word was another nail in Sabrina's coffin, but it was also a countdown for me. End of week. Time was narrowing, and their desperation would grow like fire pressed against glass. The forgery wasn't just sloppy, it was suicidal, and Croft was watching. The room grew heavy with silence. My mind drifted to Nolan. Was he in over his head, or had he sold me out willingly, fully aware of what it meant? Had Sabrina seduced him into this? Or had greed twisted his loyalty long before she entered the picture? Questions throbbed like bruises I couldn't press without pain. I wanted to believe my son was still in there, the boy who once fell asleep on my lap after baseball practice. But the man in my living room days earlier had looked like a stranger. Selma's voice pulled me back. Croft has a reputation, ruthless but precise. If Sabrina promised him a clean property and can't deliver, she won't just lose the deal. She'll owe him, and he collects. The air in the office chilled with the weight of her words. Owe him, collect. This wasn't just financial risk. This was danger. Real, human, dangerous. Suddenly, Sabrina's tears in the rain, her whispered, "They'll kill him," made a twisted kind of sense. I clenched a second wall, one Sabrina could not scale. Still, my mind circled back to Nolan. Did he understand what he'd stepped into? Or was he simply the pawn she and Croft needed? The rain outside drummed like a warning against the window pane, each drop whispering that the endgame was closer than I dared admit. I closed my notebook after writing just one sentence. The loan is their trap, but it can be mine too. The library smelled of dust and cedar polish, a comfort I hadn't known since Robert's passing. I had gone there searching for his old property files, records he used to pore over late into the night. He always believed that land was more than soil. It was memory, heritage, obligation. Now, with Sabrina and Nolan scheming, I needed to find whatever wisdom he had left behind. In the archives, among bound volumes of survey maps, my hand brushed across a folder marked with his initials. My heart faltered as if I'd touched his hand again. Inside the folder were yellowed geological reports, brittle with age but carefully preserved. Maps lined with blue veins indicated underground aquifers and fragile water tables beneath our land. I traced one with my finger, recognizing the creek where Nolan once skipped stones. A handwritten note in Robert's familiar script was clipped to the back. Excavation will poison the aquifer. Saltwater intrusion inevitable if bedrock is broken. My breath caught. This wasn't just land. It was a shield against a disaster that could ruin an entire valley. Beneath the note lay a sealed envelope addressed to me. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax. The letter inside, written in Robert's steady hand, unfolded like a voice from the grave. If they ever force you from our home, know this: the earth itself will defend you. Use these findings. No developer can touch this land without unleashing a curse on the valley. The trust I built carries a clause. Should coercion arise, it springs to life. It will protect you and punish those who forget that land is not a prize, but a responsibility. Tears blurred the ink as I clutched the letter to my chest. The springing trust. Something Robert had spoken of in vague terms. Something I had never fully understood. Suddenly became clear. It wasn't just financial. It was ethical. Legal armor forged in contamination. Marissa leaned back, smiling grimly. And if Croft knows about this, he'll pull the plug before it ever gets to court. He won't let Aurelius be painted as a company that poisons an entire valley. The truth dawned on me then. Sabrina and Nolan weren't just reckless. They were blind. They thought $33 million was victory. They didn't realize the land itself was a weapon waiting to be unleashed. "This is your checkmate," Marissa said quietly. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't yet time to play that card. Timing mattered. If I revealed the secret too soon, they would find a way to twist it. If I waited until Croft's shadow loomed closest, the revelation would break them all at once. That night, back in the motel, I laid the maps across the bedspread. The blue veins of aquifers looked like arteries, carrying life beneath the soil. I remembered Robert's voice, low and certain, telling me the earth keeps its secrets until the right moment. The rain outside tapped against the glass, as though reminding me of the water hidden below, the lifeblood of the valley. For the first time since being expelled, I felt the balance tilt in my favor. They thought they held power, but power was waiting quietly beneath their feet. I wrote one sentence in my notebook before closing it for the night. The land will defend me when the time comes. The night air was thick with perfume and false laughter as I crept closer to my own backyard. Strings of lights hung between trees, casting a carnival glow over the lawn where Robert and I once grilled burgers for neighbors. Now it had been transformed into a stage for betrayal. Waiters in white jackets carried champagne, and strangers in tailored suits strolled across the grass as if they owned it. From the shadows behind the boathouse, I watched, the bitterness in my chest hardening into something like steel. At the center of it all was Sabrina, glittering in a silver gown that caught every strand of light. She laughed too loudly, raised her glass too high, moving with the smug grace of a queen. She pointed at the rose garden Robert had tended with his bare hands, now stripped and trampled, joking about new landscaping plans. Calm and unreadable, a predator in no hurry to strike. They moved to the edge of the patio, away from the chatter. I held my breath, the shadows my shield. Croft leaned closer, speaking in low tones. Sabrina nodded, laughed nervously, but her shoulders stiffened. His voice didn't rise, yet each word landed like stone. I couldn't hear them clearly, but I knew. I saw the moment her poise cracked, the instant her smile froze into a mask. And then, 2 words. The ones she had prayed he would never say. Life estate. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand. The crystal shattered on the stone patio with a sound that silenced the entire gathering. Heads turned. The music stuttered. Sabrina stood frozen, her face draining of color, her breath shallow. Croft didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply looked at her, calm and certain, as if delivering a death sentence written long before. She realized in that instant that the $22 million dream she had clung to was ash. The crowd whispered, sensing blood in the water without knowing its source. Sabrina's hands trembled at her sides, her jeweled ring flashing like a manacle under the lights. Nolan hovered behind her, bewildered, but too cowardly to step forward. Croft gave the faintest nod, a gesture of dismissal, and turned away. The party had been transformed into a stage of humiliation, with Sabrina as its tragic centerpiece. From the shadows, I felt no triumph, only a cold, merciless clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their unraveling. The queen of the ball had been reduced to a pawn, and everyone could see it. And yet, I knew something darker. When predators are cornered, they strike blindly. Sabrina would not go quietly. Nolan's weakness and her desperation were a fuse waiting to ignite. I turned away before the party found its rhythm again. The sound of whispers and shattering pride lingered behind me. The trap was closing, but one wrong move could shatter everything Robert and I had built. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Robert's words echo. The land will defend you, but timing is everything. Carrying briefcases like weapons. They entered without hesitation, and soon the living room was no longer mine. It was a war room. Croft sat calmly on the sofa where Sabrina once gloated, his hands folded, his eyes steady. "Mrs. Pennington," he began, voice smooth, "we're here to resolve confusion. No need for courts or headlines. Let's make this quick, clean, and private." His tone was gentle, but beneath it throbbed a steel warning. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on mine. "Prolonged disputes," he said, "can bring unfortunate attention to family members. Like your son." The word lingered, sharp as a blade. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened outright, but the meaning was unmistakable. Protect your son or watch him be destroyed. For a moment, silence pressed down. Even the ticking clock seemed afraid to continue. Nolan's shame weighed on me, but I would not play by Croft's rules. Without answering, I rose and crossed the room. My hand rested on the heavy, canvas-bound folio Robert had left me. I placed it on the coffee table between us, the thud of its weight louder than any argument. Croft's lawyers exchanged glances, unease flickering across their polished faces. Croft's eyes narrowed. He had expected tears or denial, not a counterattack. "This," I said quietly, "is no longer about a house. It's about the water beneath it. Aquifers, contamination, irreversible damage, and Aurelius Capital's name attached to the crime." I opened the folio, showing maps streaked with Robert's careful notes. One wrong excavation, one foundation dug too deep, and this valley's freshwater supply is poisoned within 18 months. Do you think your investors will stomach lawsuits from an entire community when the EPA gets this report? When the press finds out a multi-billion-dollar company gambled with drinking water? My voice never rose, but every word landed like a hammer. For the first time, Croft's mask slipped. His gaze darted, quick, calculating, to his lead lawyer. A silent question. "Did you know about this?" The lawyer gave the slightest shake of his head. In that flicker, I saw fear. Not for me, but for the empire he represented. This was not victory. It was a shift. I had moved the battlefield from family betrayal to corporate exposure. They had come to crush me with money and intimidation, and instead, I had handed them a ticking bomb wrapped in Robert's handwriting. Still, in the quiet that followed, I couldn't ignore the cost. Nolan's name hung in the balance, tethered to people who would not forgive failure. I poured myself tea in the kitchen, the familiar ritual steadying my hands. I knew Croft would not retreat quietly. He would circle, searching for weakness. Sabrina would claw. Nolan would waver. And Aurelius would fight to protect its empire. But now, for the first time, I wasn't defending scraps of dignity. I was wielding a weapon Robert had placed in my hands long ago. And the question that haunted me was simple. When the final strike came, would my son stand beside me or against me? The house was silent again by evening, though the echoes of Croft's calm threat still lingered in the air. I boiled water for tea, setting 2 mugs on the table. One was for me, the other for someone I suspected would appear. The back door creaked open just as the kettle began to whistle. Nolan slipped inside, shoulders slumped, his face hollowed by exhaustion. He looked less like a grown man than a ghost of the boy who once raced toy cars across the same kitchen floor. He sat without a word, eyes fixed on the worn linoleum. When I slid the steaming mug toward him, his hands trembled as he wrapped them around it. "She called me," he whispered. "Sabrina told me about the party, about Croft. She's terrified." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "But she didn't tell me what she asked of you this morning, did she?" I asked. He shook his head, his eyes brimmed with shame. "No. She locked herself away. She won't even look at me." The dam broke then. His words spilled out, ragged and desperate. He spoke of debts piled high from reckless investments, of phone calls from creditors that grew sharper by the week, of the hole he had dug so deep he couldn't see light anymore. 600,000, he said, the number sticking in his throat. "That's how much I owe. Sabrina said the deal was our only chance. She promised a really—" "Your future," I answered. The page contained terms I had drafted. Harsh, but necessary. He would sell his car within a month, take any job within 2 weeks, enroll in debt counseling, and move out within 6 months. Weekly progress reports to me, no excuses. He gaped at me, disbelief etched across his features. "Mom, you're throwing me out?" he whispered, voice cracking like a boy again. "No," I said, steady as stone. "I'm giving you a road back, but it's one you walk alone." His tears deepened. "I don't deserve it." I met his gaze firmly. "You don't. Not yet. But dignity is earned, not given. If you want forgiveness, start with yourself." For a moment, I feared he would bolt, but then Slowly, he reached for the pen. His hand shook as he signed, each letter a scar and a vow. When the ink dried, he bowed his head into his hands, sobbing not as a coward, but as a man who had finally faced the truth. Something shifted then. Fragile, uncertain, but real. Not redemption yet, but the first step toward it. As I gathered the paper, I knew Sabrina would fight harder now. Fueled by fear, Croft would not stop circling. And Nolan, whether he stood or fell, would determine how bloody the rest of this war became. For the first time, I felt the battlefield narrowing, forcing us all into choices that could not be undone. Would Nolan keep walking the road I had drawn? Or would he stumble back into the darkness Sabrina offered? The answer would decide more than his life. It might decide mine. The county clerk's office smelled of paper and old air conditioning, a sterile place that felt far removed from the storms of betrayal that had brought us here. Yet, in its beige walls and humming lights, the next chapter of our family's war was about to be written. I sat beside Marissa, my lawyer, her posture sharp with quiet authority. Across from us sat Sabrina, stripped of her gowns and triumph, dressed in gray that drained the color from her face. She looked like someone attending her own funeral. The notary arrived, a balding man with heavy glasses and the air of a machine that never judged. He pushed in a cart stacked with documents, each one a blade in the dismantling of Sabrina and Nolan's scheme. Marissa laid them out with surgical precision. A confession of fraud, a relinquished last page back across the table, her other hand flicked, almost imperceptibly. A tiny folded note tucked beneath the stack passed into Marissa's grasp. Marissa didn't flinch, her movements as fluid as water. She tucked the paper into her pocket without looking, the secret exchange hidden even from the notary's gaze. My heart tightened. Sabrina wasn't done. Not yet. Even broken, she was scheming. The notary checked each signature, then pressed his heavy metal embosser into the first page. Thump, click. The sound echoed like a gavel. Again, thump, click. The confession became evidence. The relinquishment became law. The transfer became final. With each press, Sabrina seemed to shrink further, her shoulders curling inward, her eyes fixed on nothing. By the last stamp, she was no longer a queen, no longer even an enemy. She was something worse. Finished. When the notary collected the sealed stack, the room fell silent. Sabrina rose without looking at me. "It's done," she whispered, her voice hollow. She walked out, her heels clicking down the sterile hall like the last echoes of a rain that had collapsed in less than a week. Marissa waited until the door shut before pulling the note from her pocket. She unfolded it slowly, her lawyer's composure unbroken, but her eyes narrowed as she read. A string of numbers, a routing code, a foreign account. Cayman Islands, she murmured. Croft's slush fund, most likely. She slipped it back into her pocket, her lips curving with a predator's satisfaction. She's just given us a weapon we didn't ask for. For a moment, I should have felt victorious. The signatures were ours, the property secured, Sabrina undone. But my chest felt heavy. Nolan's confession still hung between us. Croft's shadow still lingered outside the walls, and Sabrina, though broken, had just passed me a piece of dynamite disguised as a note. The scales of justice had shifted, yes, but in the silence of the clerk's office, I couldn't shake the question clawing at me. Had we truly won, or had we just stepped into the deeper game Sabrina had set in motion? The answer came in a phone call before we even left the building. My phone buzzed. Sudden light felt almost cruel. Sabrina's figure disappeared down the steps, her shoulders slumped, her gray dress blending into the concrete. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at her. I felt something stranger, an emptiness, a recognition that she was no longer an enemy, just a shadow of her own ambition. The documents were sealed, the signatures final. The war I had been dragged into had finally written its last sentence. Back home, I sat in Robert's study. The folio of geological maps rested where it belonged, the pages no longer trembling in my hands, but lying steady on the oak desk. I thought of the nights Robert spent here, studying, protecting, planning. He had known this day might come. His springing trust, the protective clauses he had buried in law, had saved me even beyond his death. For years, I thought of him as a quiet man who loved books and rocks. Now, I knew he had been a guardian, and by stepping into his place, I had honored him. Nolan came to me days later. His face was thinner, his voice quieter. He had started the hard path laid out in the contract he signed. He worked odd jobs, enrolled in debt counseling, even sent me his first progress report, typed carefully as if it were a school assignment. When he looked at me, I didn't see the triumphant boy I once raised. I saw a man trying to rebuild himself from ash. Forgiveness wasn't there yet, but hope was. And hope was enough. Sabrina, for her part, sent a letter weeks later. It wasn't a plea for pity or a desperate attempt to claw back her old life. It was an apology, short, brutal in its honesty, free of excuses. She wrote not about what she had lost, but about what she had done. I framed it, not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder. People are rarely monsters or saints. They are both. And even in ruin, a spark of decency can remain. As for Aurelius Capital, their glittering resort plans vanished into corporate silence. Public statements spoke of shifting market conditions and
had lost. This was a new one, forged in betrayal and tempered in justice. I had lost faith in my son, then found a sliver of it again. I had seen my daughter-in-law at her worst, then glimpsed a truth she had been too weak to live by. And I had learned that the past, Robert's steady hands, his careful words, was not a chain, but a compass, pointing me forward. One morning, as mist rose off Alder Lake, I found a photo in the mail. Nolan stood in front of a forest trail sign, a Nature Conservancy logo stitched to his shirt. He was smiling, not the hollow smile of a man lost, but the quiet smile of a man who had worked, who had earned. No note accompanied it. None was needed. I placed the photo in Robert's study, beside the letter that had once guided me. Together, they reminded me that redemption is possible, even if it is slow. As the sun cleared the ridge, turning the lake to gold, I thought of Robert's last words to me. This land is a promise. Be its keeper. I had kept that promise, but more than that, I had learned the truth behind it. Family, even fractured, can find new ground to stand on, not through wealth, not through power, but through accountability, through dignity, through the hard path of truth. And so, I sit on this porch, watching the water, waiting for the next neighbor to come with a sheaf of confusing papers. Somewhere, in the laughter of strangers or the tears of the broken, I will see fragments of my own story, and I will remember. Justice is not loud. It is steady, like water running beneath the ground, carving its way toward light. Family betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those we love most. But it is in those moments of ruin that we discover the shape of our own strength. What would you have done if your son betrayed you for millions? If your daughter-in-law threw you into the rain? Would you choose mercy? Or would you fight for justice? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you see it. If this story struck a chord, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who values family, no matter how fragile. And join me next